let's talk about the science of mind. It's very important to understand this to see how the mind works in order to be able to move into exalted states beyond the mind. The mind, in its raw form, cannot be known because there is no object in it. In the order of operation, of appearance, this is how everything manifests from first cause. There is consciousness. Then within consciousness arises thought. From thought arises the body. From the body arise the sense perception, the organs of sensory perception. And from the sensory perception arises the objects of sensory perception. And then from the objects of sensory perception arise the desire for the objects of sensory perception, which are projections of thought. So first there is consciousness, then thought arises. If you see that right there, stop right there. Everything else follows from thought. You don't know your body but by thought. You don't know the capacity of sensory perception but by thought. You don't know the objects of sensory perception but by thought. And you don't know the desire for the objects of the sense perception but by thought and memory, which is thought. So, the trouble that we encounter with thought and memory, with the mind, is in mistaking the self, the true self, for the structures that we have built within the mind. And we call the perpetual structure, which is really it's one's religion, if you look at it carefully, but what we call the continuing structure of self is the ego, right, or the personality, which is recalled every morning after you wake up from your memory bank. It's like recalling a saved video game profile, and it's reenacted every day. But the circumstance in which it's reenacted and revitalized every day, part of that is the belief that it is who you are, and it is how you must be, and it is how you must show up in the world, because it's what everybody else is expecting, because they too are showing up every day within this very limited context of an idea of self reconstituted every day from memory. But if you look at the reality of mind and thought, first you see that the mind itself, as a firmament, is simply open, empty space. And here are thoughts, or here is thought as an element. Thought is like sand on a beach. And you make a castle out of the sand, knowing that time and the waves are going to erode it, knock it down, and anyway it's sand. So you yourself can knock it down, and then build a new structure, and then knock it down, and then build a new structure. And if the waves come along and knock the structure down, oh well, it doesn't matter. There's an infinite amount of sand. You just build whatever you'd like again in 5 minutes or tomorrow or next week or whenever. And so the thought is the exact same kind of material. You can build every day, as many times a day as you'd like, new structures of thought. And memory will anyway take its picture of that. And if it's logically congruent, that means to say, if you build a structure out of thought and it can't stay up, well then it's not stable. And so it'll anyway, right? There's no grammar to it. There's no logical consistency or congruence to it. So it anyway has no value as a tool. But if there's a structure that is built of thought, and thought is like sand, it's already there, you just configure it. And so you configure something out of thought, and it serves as a worthwhile tool in some capacity or another. Memory will log it and store it to be reaccessed whenever you'd like. So there's no need for you to consciously make an attempt to hold on to the memory, nor is there a need for you to consciously try to keep the thought together. You're supposed to let thought disintegrate. You're supposed to let thought fall apart. You're not meant to hold on to thought as a concrete reality. You're not meant to hold on to a thought and preserve it like a mummy day in and day out. That's what results in putrefaction of the mind, of the brain, of the body, and the energy system. Thought takes care of itself. It stores itself, it logs itself into the Akash. The Akash takes care of memory. That is, the intelligence of consciousness itself takes care of memory. You don't have to do anything about it. There's a natural logging system, a natural sorting system, a natural system of cosmic order that handles memory and thought on your behalf. You don't have to do anything about it. The problem is you think you have to do something about it. There's nothing to do about it. And if you try to create a permanent structure of thought, you can only become insane. Thought is not permanent. And when you try to make something which is impermanent permanent, the only result is suffering, bedlam, mayhem, and everything else that we apparently claim to find reprehensible and yet continue to reenact every day. So, something to consider. The very structure of thought is meant to be a tool. It's like sand, again, on a beach. You're meant to build it up into something, either for utility or for play, for fun, and then, when you're finished with it, you simply let it go. And if you need to reconstruct it again, you have the capacity to reconstruct it again. You don't need to try to concretize it. And it's the very attempt to concretize thought, that's what's meant by the ego or the personality, is a concretized form of thought which is dragged from day to day to day to day to day. That's not how thought is meant to be used. It's irresponsible and it makes you insane. The only result from that is depression, anxiety, and all other mental maladies. So if you would be free, if you would be psychologically clear, psychologically healthy and sane, you must see the nature of thought and see that it's not meant to be preserved. And once that's done, you can sit here completely empty for as long as you'd like, but there are dimensions beyond thought, far beyond thought. Thought's nothing. There are dimensions far beyond thought, much closer than thought, that you cannot explore as long as you're attached to thought. There are dimensions that you can only enter into when you have no attachment. This is why in the spiritual world, we often talk about no attachment, not because no attachment is some kind of a standalone virtue, but because as long as you're whatever you are attached to is thought. Thought is the only thing to be attached to, because you only know whatever you know through thought. And as long as you're attached, chained, that means chained, to a bundle of thought, you're anchored. And you don't have the capacity to enter into higher dimensions of perception, which you can only enter into if you don't have an anchor, if you don't have a cord tying you to anything. So this is why, again, everything that is spoken about in the spiritual sciences is not meant to be some kind of virtue that you conform to for the sake of looking like anything. Right? So non-attachment is not about sitting here and priding yourself on being non-attached. It's about the fact that not being attached to thought is intelligent, it's wise. One, because it puts thought in its proper place and it allows you the capacity to use thought fluidly and properly and appropriately and correctly, but it also allows you the higher capacities to perceive dimensions of reality that you cannot perceive and to access them and to use them in ways that you can't, if you're attached to the maintenance of certain thought structures. Which means you don't trust thought to do its job, you don't trust memory to do its job, you don't trust the intelligence of consciousness to order and manage everything. And without that trust, without that faith, there's simply dimensions, most of the dimensions of life are not open to you. So, if you would access these higher dimensions, you must be willing to let your idea of yourself go, your image of yourself go, your image of the world go. The whole elaborate, because it's more than simply a sandcastle that you've built on the beach of the firmament of your mind. You've built a whole worldscape. And you think it's so special or clever or precious. And it's absolutely nothing. It's garbage. In the face of what actually is beyond the dimension of thought. And the moment you taste what's beyond thought, you lose your interest in the world of thought, because you see it's really there as a technology to bring about well-being, to physical security in the world, which is only complete when it includes everybody. And so as long as certain games are being played of security here but insecurity there, in whatever form that manifests, then one cannot help but to be stuck in the world of thought. But if you see the true meaning of security, which can never be psychological, you can't make the impermanent permanent, then you go beyond the impermanent into the permanent, into the absolute, into the eternal. And this is where the real spiritual path begins. It's not where it ends, it's where it begins. Because it's only in awareness of the absolute, of the eternal, that one, there's any joy, there's any peace, and peace is the basis of it. There's peace. And only from a place of peace, which means no guilt, no shame, not as an ideal. You can't declare that you won't feel this or feel that. You do feel it. You can't declare that you won't. You have to bring an end to it now, which can't be done unless thought is completely put aside, seen in its true light, and then gone beyond. And going beyond it and stepping into the eternal dimension of peace is the basis of the capacity to engage in conscious technologies of ecstasy, which is what actual shamanism is about, or what people call shamanism, or actual tantra, or yogic practices, or the Shaolin sciences, qigong, all of the high spiritual arts and high spiritual sciences are all technologies of ecstasy. And the very ecstasy that is, shall I say, conducted through the use of these spiritual arts, this awareness, is the very basis of intelligence itself. And so you get to be in this marvelous place where every cell in your body is feeling phenomenal, and you're aware that that very ecstasy is God, is consciousness itself, and it's pure intelligence, and it reveals everything to you, beyond anything the mind could ever know, beyond anything that thought could ever know. And anyway, in that knowing, that real knowing, you see anyway that thought doesn't know a thing. Thought doesn't know. Consciousness knows. Thought is an instrument which is quite dead. It's consciousness which imbues thought with its power to move. Thought itself doesn't know a thing. Thought can't know a thing. And so the one who is identified with thought also doesn't know a thing, but is convinced that they know quite a number of things, quite many things. But it's only one who goes into consciousness that knows anything. And that knowing is inseparable from peace. It's inseparable from love. It's inseparable from compassion. And it's inseparable from the ecstasies that can be known within that great field of peace. And one cannot conduct these ecstasies, one cannot know them directly, as long as one is living in a state of guilt, shame, inwardly, being afraid of anything, whether you're afraid of pleasure or afraid of pain, if you're in a state of judgment, if you're in a state of condemnation, if you're in a state of comparison, it's all the same thing. Because how can you compare unless you have an image? And if you have an image, that image is built by thought. All images are built by thought. And so if you have an image of yourself, and therefore an image of the world, or an image of another, there's comparison taking place, which means there's a chaining of oneself to thought, a binding of oneself to the psyche. And so that's the anchor. There's no takeoff possible. And yet the whole social situation of our civilizational structure teaches you, from the moment you're in school, you're taught to compare. You're taught to compare yourself to the person next to you. And people, even thinking themselves clever, will say nonsense about, don't compare yourself to others, only compare yourself to you. Just don't even, that's insane. You're insane. Comparing your present version of yourself to your past, that's insane. One, the past you doesn't exist, it's not real, it's just another ego image. It's another psychological structure built of image, of time, of memory, of thought. It's not real. And for you to even talk about your present self, you can't even talk about the present self as a discrete or concrete self without it having been imaged. You can only compare images. You can't compare truth or reality to anything. So if you're comparing at all, even if you say comparing the past to the present, you're really comparing the past to the past, pretending that one side of the past is the present and the other side is the past. It's not true. You cannot make an image without that image already being the past. All thought is the past. All psychological imagery is the past. Even an image you make right now, you can't call it an image unless it's demarcated, unless it's been separated, individualized, which means it's already in the past. So there's nothing to compare. Don't compare. Comparison is a matter of techniques. Here's copper, here's iron. That's a necessary comparison. Here's oak, here's spruce. That's a necessary comparison. Obviously, here's linen, here's cotton. That's a necessary comparison. But in terms of your being, your existence, your life, what comparison? That's insane. Totally insane. And the very consequence of living in that insanity is all of the mental maladies, which the common method of handling is prescriptions and pharmaceuticals, medications. And if people aren't taking doctor-prescribed medications, they're self-medicating in so many ways, chemically or otherwise. And there's no way out. You're never going to take enough medication to get the mind to act right. The only thing to do is to understand, to comprehend the nature of the mind. And you can only do that through direct observation of your own mind, of the mind itself. It's not your own mind. There's no my mind and your mind. There's the mind. And you have to observe it directly for yourself, which requires total fearlessness, which is the willingness to die. Because when the structures that you've built in the mind, which you've identified with, are dissolved, it feels like you're dying because you've identified with it. You're not, but you feel like it. So there has to be a willingness to go beyond. It's like if you ever, this is the story of most of the so-called heroes' journeys, right? Where the character, the so-called hero, right, the candidate, the shamanic candidate or the yogic candidate, the tantric candidate, begins in their home village, their hometown. Sometimes it's an island or just a small hamlet somewhere. And their soul is calling them to leave and to go, and no one really leaves, no one really goes, and the way of life is there, it's happening, and it's, there's survival, and people are basically content to some degree or another. But our hero, our candidate, at present, simply can't quell the restlessness of the soul, and feels that deep longing to go. And then finally the opportunity comes, and the ship comes in, and they have the opportunity to follow the call of the soul. But at the price of possibly, it's always uncertain, but at the price of possibly never being able to come back again. And that's in that feeling that arises, that you have to leave everything you know behind, in order to go, knowing that you may never see it again, and if you do, it may be so unrecognizable to you and you to it that it may not want you and you may not want it. That complete stepping into the unknown, that's what it feels like. That's the price you have to pay, is going through that feeling. But it's just a feeling. Now, it may be true, you don't know what's going to happen, you may come back, you may not come back, but you don't know that anyway. You may die tomorrow. You don't know. You don't know if you're going to come back or not anyway. But rather than ignore that and just numb yourself, because the moment you've come into the realization of this possibility, either you do it or you hide from it until you die. And so at some point you simply can't hide from it any longer and you have to take the plunge. Will I come back or won't I come back? I don't know. But if you don't take the plunge, then it stays gnawing at you until you take the plunge. And anyway, you don't have that certainty anyway. With or without the plunge, there's no certainty. And so you see anyway, really, the wisest thing to do is to take the plunge. It's not the safest thing to do. In fact, you have to risk everything. But even if you don't risk it all for the sake of taking the plunge, you anyway could lose it all tomorrow under who knows what circumstance. So, it's that choice between the unknown or the known. And the unknown has to be chosen wholeheartedly, with total determination, with total resolve. And once that decision is made and the jump is had, the journey will be whatever it will be, and if you don't die, guess what? You come back with everything. You come back with everything. And if you die, you die. It's okay. But you're going to die anyway. The body's going to die. But when you take that plunge into the unknown, feel like you're going to die, and you don't. And you're given everything. All awareness, all perception, awareness of who you really are, where you've come from, the only place you could go. Everything comes flooding in. And you see, it's really the safest thing there is. Jumping into the void is the safest move you could ever make in your life. You see that there's only actually true security in jumping into the void. Not jumping into the void, there's a false sense of security, but it only brings misery. And you see, it's actually not secure. So, really, the jump is the only sane move, really. And it allows you, once you've done it, to use all the tools you've been given appropriately. That includes the body, that includes the mind, and therefore, obviously, the emotional faculties. And more importantly than any of that, really, is one's energy, your life force energies, your prana, your chi, your ki. I heard the Irish word the other day. I think it was something like nieva, something like that. And it was an interesting word. But conducting that is how one brings oneself, how one raises one's energy inwardly and brings oneself into those tantric ecstasies, those yogic ecstasies, those spiritual states of bliss, which contain all information, all direct awareness of everything. It's pure intoxication and yet pure sobriety at the same time. It's in the Quran, it describes it as a clear, intoxicating drink with no intoxicating effects, or some. I have to go back and read it, or maybe I won't. But it's the idea that it's in the yogic sciences. It's called the soma. In the Nordic animistic tradition, it's called Suttungsmjöður, or the meat of poetry. And it's that essence of pure spirit, of pure consciousness, which is the source of everything, giving itself to itself, revealing itself to itself, which all human beings are called to drink of, to know. And when you drink of it, it's more than just that you become it, you do, but you realize that you always were it, and that it is all there is, pretending in so many ways not to be what it is. And that the whole game of manifest reality is consciousness pretending in so many ways. It's the formless pretending not to be formless. It's the timeless pretending not to be timeless. It's consciousness, the unlimited, pretending to be the limited. There's no other game it could play. All games require boundary, border, limitation. Otherwise, there's no game. There's no play. Play requires the appearance of duality. And so for the non-dual to play, it has to manifest as duality. It's clear, isn't it? And therefore the non-dual has a certain set of eternal laws by which it abides. By its very nature, it's not that it's constrained by any law. It can break all law in the form of dualistic manifestation. But when you see the nature of the non-dual being, non-dual consciousness, you see what it is. All-encompassing, no beginning, no end. And therefore there are certain eternal implications. It doesn't belong to anybody. Everything belongs to it. That is to say, it's not dependent upon any particularity. No culture can claim it and say we have it and you don't. No religion, no group, no person can say, can claim exclusive right to it. It is what everything is made of. It's all there is. And surrendering to it is the realization that you always were in heaven. Heaven's right here. Heaven isn't out there after you die. No one ever told you that. You think they did, but no Buddha, no Christ, no Krishna, no enlightened being ever told you anything other than that paradise, that ecstasy, that peace was any other place than right here inside of you. So, seeing that thought is there for you to build temporary structures with and then to dissolve them, and that you don't have to worry about the capacity of remembering them because they'll be remembered anyway. That's how memory works. Memory functions rather automatically. A structure of thought is built, memory makes an image of it, and anyway, the Akash stores all structures of memory, and then you let it go. You don't try to preserve sandcastles, do you? That's insane. So, if you trust thought and memory to take care of themselves, no problem. And then there's no comparison. You don't make an image of yourself. You don't need to, and you see, you don't need to make an image of what is. Image making is an abstraction. Thought is for dealing with the abstract, which is that which is not present. When you're dealing with what's present, you don't need an image of it. If you're in front of me, why do I need an image of you? If I'm right here, hello, I'm right here. So if I'm right here, why do I need an image of myself? I don't. And if I'm looking at you, if you're with me, we're beholding one another, why do I need an image of you? Any image you draw up of any person is never accurate. It can't be. Any image you make of the world is never accurate. It can't be. Any image you make of God is never accurate. It can't be. And so when you see that your images of self, of consciousness, of love, of peace, of joy, of ecstasy, of life can never be accurate, you stop making them. And your image of thought isn't thought. You can't make an image of thought because thought in the raw is like sand. It's already its own image. Thought is made in its own image. So your ideas of thought are not thought. You either see thought, how it works, or you don't. And if you see thought for how it works, thank God. It means you've stepped back enough to see it. And then there's release, there's peace, because the lack of peace, the lack of release is simply not realizing what thought is. Being addicted to it, being hooked to it, thinking that you have to sustain it, otherwise something bad will happen. No, it won't. That's part of thought, of fear. But once you demolish that sandcastle, that image of yourself, totally and completely, only once, then you see what it is, and then you're free to build as many images and demolish as many images as you like. You can build a new image and destroy it every day. And that's why the physical manifestation, when the non-physical, when the formless first comes into form, it's called as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, which means the creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer. Because everything in the order of time has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the only thing you can do with time, with manifest reality, is create, sustain, and destroy. There's no other option. That's all it is, and that's all you can do with it. And beyond time, there's no creation, nor destruction, nor nothing to maintain. So when you see that everything in the order of time, which means thought is time, thought is meant to arise, appear for a while, and vanish. And if you see that, you just let it do its thing. You let it be in its nature. You stop fussing with it. You stop taking it personally. You don't personalize it. Unless you want to for your personal enjoyment or entertainment. But it's like a game. You ever play a game with somebody and they start taking it seriously and it's not fun anymore? It's like, what are you getting angry for? It's a game. We're having fun. We're playing. And so if you forget that thought is there for you to play with, if you forget that thought and that personality and memory is there for you to enjoy, then you see, then you think you have to go fix it. You can't fix it. You just let it be taken back into the ocean. You just give it up. You can't fix it. That's like trying to go, imagine fixing a sandcastle. It's like, what the fuck? It just doesn't make any sense. So